Hello and welcome to the Killer Bits. Well, that's it. The year is almost over and done with, and we thought we'd take these kind of next few days to go through, pick out our games of the year. Seems appropriate, everybody else is doing it, so why not us? Anyway, I thought I'd kick things off by trying to pick out the indie titles that have kind of stood out to me this year, and we have actually had a fair few decent games for a change. And to kick things off, I think we should really go all the way back to the start of the year, and one game that really did strike a chord with me was the Banner Saga by the guys at Stoic and Versus Evil.
Now, for those of you who have no idea what the Banner Saga is, it is essentially a tactical RPG set in a fantasy Norse world in which our heroes, the humans and the Varl, are forced to band together to take on the Dredge, an old and powerful enemy once thought to be extinct, but are now returning to wreak death and destruction upon the land. The reason this game has made it onto my list is not the story, which is genuinely engaging, or the gorgeous Don Bluth-esque rotoscoped art style. It's the combat. You have to genuinely think tactically about how you place your troops or how you tackle an enemy. It feels like some beautifully drawn chess match that forces you to think about what you're doing and makes victory in battle even more satisfying.
Next up, we leave the frozen wastes of the Viking North and, well, I suppose head out west to the slightly irradiated deserts of Wasteland 2.
After raising over 2.9 million on Kickstarter, we all kind of knew the deserts of Wasteland 2 were going to be vast. But what Brian Fargo and the guys at In Exile have done is create a post-apocalyptic world that you will quite happily get lost in. Even though it's been 26 years since the original Wasteland, and we've had the Fallout games in between time to keep us topping up on those rads, Wasteland 2 is still just as brutal and engaging as it ever was. Despite some rather clunky UI and character models you wouldn't write home about, it's the environments that shine through here. The isometric level design, be it some desert outpost or an underground dungeon filled with mutants, is rich and detailed, and genuinely gives you a sense of what the world might be like after the bombs drop. If you're looking for a world to get lost in, I highly recommend Wasteland 2.
So carrying on the theme of, huge expansive RPGs with, turn-based combat and literally acres of text to scroll through, we've got the next instalment in the Divinity universe of games with Divinity Original Sin.
I never really got into the Divinity games. Despite there being a loyal and vocal fan base out there, then I decided to give Original Sin a go. This game is worth playing just for the writing alone. Yes, at times it does feel a little cheesy, and yes, playing out both sides of a conversation between the main characters can leave you feeling a little schizophrenic. But it's the conversations you have with characters that brings this game to life. You play as a pair of source hunters, heroes tasked with tracking down the eponymous source, a magical MacGuffin that's leading the land into rack and ruin. And right from the get-go you are presented with a lot of dialogue. But rather than doing the usual RPG thing of skipping through it all, just to get to the next battle, you quickly realise it's well worth stopping to read the text. The choices you make in conversations will not only make you smile and actually laugh at times, but also help to flesh out the experience with the story. And can even help to unlock and explore new paths within the game, which you'd initially miss if you take a slaughter everyone and everything approach. Divinity Original Sin makes it onto my list, not only for being a great RPG with some decent combat, but for having some of the best writing in an indie game in a very long while.
So despite a lot of people thinking, is the whole green light Kickstarter model starting to crumble under its own weight? The bubble's starting to burst. We've had a few projects kind of stumble, shall we say? It's nice to see some of these kind of bigger, high-profile Kickstarter projects coming into fruition. We've had developers actually taking a risk and kind of going back to an old format that kind of fallen by the wayside, but they've refreshed it. They've brought back this kind of turn-based strategy model, and it's proving popular. I mean, we've had stuff like Divinity, we've had Wasteland 2, we've had other projects from people like Double Fine. They brought us Massive Chalice. We've had Invisible Ink from the guys at Clay. We've had Xenonauts. The guys there have brought back the old school XCOM model, the original, things like that. But it wouldn't be a year in indie games without, one or two survival crafting games, one or two. But, I mean, the one I've picked out, it's a bit different. It's unlike its voxel-based brethren. It's got a story. It's a And it's a deep, dark story, in fact, and it's relevant today despite being inspired by events back in the 90s. It is This War of Mine.
So as you may know, I'm not a huge fan of survival crafting games, mainly because I find the crafting in a lot of them is tedious, and the survival aspect normally vanishes within the first 20 minutes after you've died for the first time and gained a modicum of competency. But this War of Mine feels like something different. After being dumped into a war zone with a handful of random survivors, a scarcity of food, and the prospect of peacekeepers arriving months away, you genuinely feel like this is going to be a struggle to survive. With snipers making movement during the daylight hours impossible, you spend your days indoors crafting what you can from your meagre supplies, before heading out at night to scavenge whatever resources you can find. What makes things more difficult is the limit on what you can carry, the constant threat from other well-armed survivors, and your own moral choices on whether to steal or kill to survive. And even then, if you do have a good night's pickings, you'll inevitably return to your shelter to find it's been raided, half your stuff has been stolen, and that one guy you left behind to recover from his wounds has been wounded again. As they say, war is hell, and if you are of a slightly masochistic nature and want to see how long you can survive in a war zone, I highly encourage you to give This War of Mine a shot.
So moving on from one dark game to another, though this one is dark for a whole other reason. Mainly because you've probably forgotten to keep an eye on the power levels and all the lights have gone out. That's right, it's time to spend 5 nights at Freddy's! Woo!
For some, 5 Nights at Freddy's is just yet another in a long slew of YouTube fodder titles. A low-budget first-person horror guaranteed to get your favourite YouTube celebrities screaming into their webcams. But despite not being a fan of horror titles myself, I have to hand it to Scott Cawthon, the game's creator. He's managed to create a genuinely scary game from an incredibly simple concept. At its heart, Freddy's is a point-and-click game in which you take on the role of a night watchman at a restaurant with demonic animatronics. You track these monstrous automatons using the slightly shoddy CCTV, all whilst keeping an eye on the ever-depleting power levels and preparing for the inevitable jump scares. The reason 5 Nights has made it onto my top indies list is for its simplicity, for the hidden lore found throughout the game, and for the fact that this game only came into being because Scott had trolls online saying the character design in some of his previous games was scary. So instead of giving up on games design altogether, he turned it into something advantageous and actually made a really scary game.
Well, 5 Nights at Freddy's is never going to be accused of being, well, a pretty game. But this next one, it could be the best looking game of the entire year. I am, of course, talking about the absolutely stunning The Vanishing of Ethan Carter.
The astronauts have managed to create a phenomenal looking game in Ethan Carter. A detective romp designed to not only test your grey matter, but also the specs of your PC.
Ethan Carter, I didn't know.
You play as Paul Prospero, a paranormal detective working on his last case. As you enter the gorgeous Red Creek Valley, you are instantly confronted with a slew of dead bodies, which are clues in of themselves as to what has been happening in town and to Ethan's disappearance. Your supernatural gifts allow you to piece together the final moments of these murdered individuals, and is a nice twist on the typical detective genre. The puzzles are fairly straightforward and can easily be solved with a little trial and error. But the game's real strength is in the way it looks. As I said, it's gorgeous and outshines practically every other game out there this year, from both indies and AAAs alike. So if you are a graphics whore with a penchant for detective novels and a monster rig you want to benchmark, definitely pick this up. For everyone else, if you are after something creative and beautiful, this is definitely worth checking out.
Okay, so far all these games have been, well, a bit on the serious side. Time for something a bit more fun, I reckon. And what could be more fun than, jumping up and down on your friends' heads and filling them full of arrows? Time to let loose on Towerfall Ascension.
Originally pitched as the killer app for the Ouya, when Towerfall made its way across to PC and PS4 earlier this year, a whole load more people got to find out why this is such a brilliant party game. According to Matt Thorson, the game's creator, it was originally inspired by couch co-op games from his youth, such as Bushido Blade and GoldenEye. After toying with the concept in a few game jams and testing out ideas with his fellow indies, the game we know and love was born. This is just one of those games that is just tons of fun. All you have to do is grab a couple of mates, grab some controllers, and anyone can play. And with the Towerfall Ascension port, the game has received a whole load of new content, including single player and co-op, to go along with the existing game modes and mutators that make every match in this game an absolute riot.
Okay, moving on from one, single-screen action platformer, I suppose, to, well, a single-screen adventure game. The whole point-and-click adventure genre has had a resurgence of late, and this next game is, less fun with friends and more, oh god, how long can I survive this torture and keep my crew from starving or going insane? Wherever you are in the galaxy, gods will be watching.
Born out of a Ludum Dare game jam title, Gods Will Be Watching uses its restrictions to its advantage and runs a masterclass in stress management and team resources. With just a single screen to focus on and a simplified pixel art style, this game rewards you for being both observant and having a multi-tracked mind. You have to lead your team through a variety of scenarios, from a hostage taking to being trapped in a lab with a deadly virus. You have to keep an eye on everyone's physical and mental well-being whilst trying to get the job done before the time runs out and everyone dies. When it came out, this game had mixed reviews, but I appreciated seeing something a little bit different from all the usual indie fare, even if death was inevitable on occasion.
If making those tough decisions about which of your crew live or die is a little heavy going for you, maybe we should wind the clock back to, a simpler time. The late 80s, early 90s, when all you had to worry about was moving from left to right and jumping on your enemies' heads. A time of honour and chivalry. Time to unearth one of the real gems of this year, in Shovel Knight.
If you grew up in the 80s, you'll probably have fond memories of games like DuckTales and Mega Man. And that's what Shovel Knight is. A beautiful homage to those classic platformers of yesteryear. Simple, tight mechanics, colourful 8-bit graphics, a great soundtrack, and a lovable hero. From the moment Shovel Knight leaps onto the screen shouting, "For chivalry!" to taking on the villainous swine of the Order of No Quarter, you will be pogoing to your heart's content with a giant smile on your face. What's more, even if you're terrible at platformers, like me, you will still keep coming back for more. Encouraged to try again and again by the frequent checkpoints and the chance to recover your lost treasure, Dark Souls style, by getting back to where you fell last time. Shovel Knight is an unadulterated joy that everyone should try. There was just no question that it would be on our top list of indies this year.
So last but certainly not least, we have a game that not only looks beautiful, it sounds beautiful as well. It's got fantastic story, really solid combat. I mean, a few years ago when the guys at Supergiant Games released Bastion, they set the bar high for indie games everywhere. This year, with Transistor, they have nailed it.
When I first heard about Transistor, I was worried, was this going to be Supergiant's difficult second album? How could they ever live up to the expectations set by Bastion? What we got was a breathtaking action RPG, which, in my opinion, looks even better than Bastion, has a kick-ass soundtrack, and a goddamn talking sword.
Hey, Red.
What more could you want?
We're not gonna get away with this, are we?
You play as Red, a singer whose voice has been stolen and is catapulted into mystery and conflict with robots attacking you at every turn. Your only ally in all this is the Transistor, a giant glowing sword with a voice and a mind of its own. This talkative blade not only acts as your main weapon, but is also the narrator guiding you through the cyberpunk Art Deco city of Cloudbank.
Never seen Goldwalk cleared out.
As fantastic as the story and the soundtrack are in this game, it's the combat that's the real star of the show. Switching between straight up hack and slash and the ability to pause time, you can unleash a devastating barrage of attacks against your foes before darting away and recharging. And the abilities you acquire along the way give rise to all kinds of experimentation in combat, as each ability can be used either as an active or passive, or even as a modifier to other attacks. This game is just incredibly satisfying from top to toe and is definitely one of the standout titles of this year.
So there you have it, my top indie games of 2014. There have been a few notable exceptions. I mean, stuff like Threes and Monument Valley, but I don't own an iPad, so I couldn't really experience them. Also want to give a shout out to stuff like Plague Inc. I mean, it's a fantastic game. It turns global pandemics into a fun management sim. Orbitalis. I sank way too many hours into it, trying to find that perfect stable orbit. And I suppose we have to give a shout out to the guys at Bone Loaf for Gang Beast. We're huge fans of it here on the channel. Where else can you beat up your mates as jelly baby men? Throwing them into grinders and flame pits. It is a fantastic party game. But all three of these are, early access titles, so they don't really qualify for this year's list. Maybe next year. But if you get a chance to check them out, please do. One more studio I want to kind of give a nod to. Not exactly an indie studio either. It's Ubisoft. Somehow, Ubisoft have managed to produce a couple of the best non-indie games of this year, with Child of Light and Valiant Hearts. They are both gorgeous games. Who would have thought in 2014 a big studio like Ubi would have produced an entire game in Rhyme? It's insane. But if they actually do more of this kind of slightly more experimental stuff using the UbiArt engine, which is a fantastic looking engine, maybe a few more of these type of experimental games as opposed to the broken open world games where you have to climb towers all the time, maybe they'll win back a few more fans.
Beware the night, child of light.
So those have been my big indies of 2014, but what about you? What has your indie of the year been? Why not let us know? You can drop us a comment in the comment section below, or get in touch with us on Twitter @TheKillerbits, or on Facebook at facebook.com/TheKillerbits. But before you go rushing off to enjoy the new year, I have one last bit of business to take care of. How would you like to win a whole load of cool games? You would? Good. Well, I am giving you a chance to win a whole load of the indie titles I've mentioned in this episode. If you would like to win a copy of Transistor, Gods Will Be Watching, Shovel Knight, This War of Mine, The Vanishing of Ethan Carter, and any other random, codes I find in my emails, we want to know, if you could create your own indie game that would kind of sum up 2014, what would it be? Now, I'm not after an essay or anything like that. Just give us the elevator pitch. Make it smart. Make it funny. The most creative answer will win all these games. All the details are in the description below. But if you're watching this video a few days too late, there is one last chance to win. If you tune in New Year's Eve, we have got our Game of the Year show, we've kind of compiled all our lists. Me, Toby, Fran, Peter, we've put them all together, put our heads together, and we are crowning the Game of the Year. The Killerbits seal of approval. Tune in, check out the main show. We had a lot of fun putting it together. A lot of debates on what actually the Game of the Year was. But as well as that, we are giving away a butt ton of more prizes in that episode. So you have a second chance to win. But to be in a better chance to actually see all these videos, get in there before the closing date there is, you might want to consider subscribing. It would help us out. I don't want to sound needy or anything, but it's worth it because, we have got the other guys doing their top 5 indie, not indie games, but games of the year. And I will probably put together a list in the new year of, what indies to look forward to. We have the main show, we have all the Let's Plays. It is definitely worth checking us out and subscribing. But until then, I will leave you to enjoy the rest of the holidays. Enjoy the new year, and I will see you soon. Bye.